Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, global markets reporter at Nasdaq. IBM announced for the first time 5 core areas of research that the company will tackle in the next 5 years to enable a more sustainable future. Joining me to discuss is Dr. Jeff Welser, Vice President of IBM Research. Dr. Welser, it's great to have you with us. Welcome to Trade Talks.
Thanks very much. Happy to talk to you about our 5 and 5.
And you know, IBM has always believed in the essential role of science. Why is now the time to place more emphasis on it and take critical action?
I think we've seen in 2020 just a plethora of new challenges ahead of us, many of which we never anticipated, whether it's COVID-19 or the increasing effects of climate change, which we're seeing across the world. So I think now more than ever, finding ways to discover new materials that can actually help with some of these big problems, which really is the role of science, it becomes that much more urgent.
What are the 5 core areas and which technologies will be applied to try and achieve them?
So our main focus with this is to actually find ways to accelerate materials discovery, molecule discovery in general. So finding new materials with new functionality. The 5 areas we want to actually focus on for this year, one is on carbon capture. Can we actually capture CO2 and fix it as it comes out of our exhausts and out of our power plants? Can we find ways to grow food more sustainably without so much energy? So finding better ways of making fertilizers, for example. Can we find ways of making some of our products more sustainable? Particularly, we focused on batteries right now, which are a huge part of the renewable energy economy, as well as electric cars. Can we make those more sustainable? Or maybe closer to IBM's business, can we make our computer chips more sustainable? Can we think about the materials we put in those every day, since computer chips are literally in everything we use these days? How do we make that more sustainable? And lastly, with COVID-19 itself, it's become clear you've got to find ways to rapidly find new drugs for treatments or for vaccines. That can take 10 years. Are there ways we can find to reuse drugs that we already have that have already been proven safe to do treatments earlier before we can find those new cures?
Of those technologies, which one is IBM leaning in on the most and why?
So I think we're leaning in very heavily, particularly on those where we're finding materials for sustainability. So that'd be both in sort of the battery space, but also in the computer space itself, because those are areas where that manufacturing really can make a big difference, just because of the scale at which it gets used. Further out, we would love to solve the problem around nitrogen and fertilizers. That's a harder problem, one where we think quantum computing could play a big role in the future, but that's one it's more of a long bet that we're going after.
Right, and that's my next question. Realistically, when do you think success will be achieved within the 5 core areas? Then, of course, Jeff, how do you measure that? How do you quantify what success is?
Yeah, so it obviously varies by each one. Some are going to be very incremental over time. We'll make maybe small improvements on how we produce a fertilizer, for example, or small improvements on batteries, like we did with removing heavy metals in the current version. Can we find another way to maybe make the electrolytes safer? So these sorts of things we can see really happening on sort of a yearly basis. That's why we say within 5 years we expect to see real progress on it. Some of the longer term questions, like can we ever really get a quantum computer that could simulate the chemistry that we need to discover a new drug? That's something that's still maybe 5 to 10 years out.
Even still, that's a remarkable timeline with that kind of technology. It was great to have you with us. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks.
Thank you so much.
You got it. And thanks for joining me. I'm Jill Malandrino, global markets reporter at Nasdaq.